A student must choose between 3 girls to inherit a temple. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. Uriu Kamihate is a student trying to get into medical school. After being taken in by the head priest, he discovers that he must marry one of the 3 priestess sisters if he wants to inherit the Amagami Shrine, which is where he's headed at this very moment. According to Uriu, marriage is one of the connections that bind humans like a thread of fate, much like the connections we share with friends, family, and now with the new life he's about to begin. As he enters the shrine with his nose buried in a book, 2 visitors remark to each other that this boy must be praying to pass some exam. But Uriu is far from relying on any divine intervention to achieve his goals. He doesn't even believe in gods. When he opens the door and calls out for someone, there's no response, so he wanders through the rooms of the house, searching for any sign of life to welcome him. In theory, the head priest should be quite old, so maybe he just can't hear from far away. But as Uriu walks through the place, he hears feminine voices behind a door and decides not to open it, not wanting to be seen as a pervert. Yet just as he thinks that 3 maidens appear, not wearing much clothing. One of them offers her hand to the boy as he had fallen backward from the shock. But since he doesn't respond, the girls return to their room and Uriu decides to pretend he saw nothing. However, the girls come back now fully dressed, and the red-haired one is furious, ready to exact revenge on the insolent guy, throwing salt on him to purify him. The black-haired girl thinks they should tend to the boy, who's now bleeding, while the blue-haired one is surprised that people still get nosebleeds when they're startled. Once the initial shock wears off, the 4 of them gather and Uriu explains that he'll be living there from now on and says it's a pleasure to meet the priestesses. The redhead, however, asks if his pleasure comes from spying on innocent maidens changing clothes. Though Uriu tries to justify that it was an accident, she doesn't let up and remains furious. Putting that aside, he asks where the head priest is. The black-haired girl, visibly the most welcoming, informs him that he'll only arrive tomorrow and introduces herself as Yi Amagami, assuring the boy he can count on her as she's the eldest at 20 years old. The blue-haired one chimes in, saying that Yi might be the oldest, but she's also the most childish. On the other hand, being the youngest, Asahi Amagami expects to be pampered by Uriu and treated like a little sister as she's only 14. Lastly, Yuna Amagami, at the ripe age of 17, exclaims that she still hasn't accepted the intruder as a family member, as she dislikes the idea of men living there. Uriu doesn't care about her opinion because he came to study, not to play house. With his English vocabulary book, he just wants his space to focus on reading, nothing more. Seeing that Yuna stands up and promises to keep an eye on the outsider, saying he'd better behave if he wants to eat. Also, she intentionally gets his name wrong just to annoy him, leaving him visibly frustrated. Next, Yi shows him his new room after personally cleaning it, though the closet is an absolute mess. While trying to pull out the futon mattress from the back, the girl ends up causing the clutter to fall on top of her, and Uriu ends up serving as her cushion. When Yuna arrives to see what all the noise was, she finds her sister on top of the guy's face and decides to punish him with aggression, assuming he's a pervert. After all that chaos, Uriu finally gets a moment of peace to focus on his studies, but it seems Asahi isn't willing to leave him alone. She thinks it's the perfect time for the 2 of them to get to know each other better, but Uriu tells her to back off like she's some kind of pest. Asahi gets offended, thinking that as a beautiful girl being shooed away by a guy is ridiculous, so she questions whether he's really a man. Since he doesn't respond directly, she looks for a girly magazine in the noble boy's suitcase, tossing his clothes around like there's no tomorrow. Uriu tries to stop her, but he trips over one of the discarded garments and ends up falling on top of her. Of course, Yuna walks in at that exact moment and sees Uriu in yet another compromising position. Naturally, the redhead gives him another beating. Sometime later, Uriu can no longer focus on his studies, so he decides to wash his face to clear his mind. As he crosses the hallway, he notices a slightly open door and peers in to see if anyone is still awake. Inside, he finds Yuna passed out on the floor without a blanket. When the girl sneezes, he decides to cover her, but she wakes up at the worst possible moment and assumes he's up to no good. Yuna struggles and kicks the poor guy, causing him to fall on top of her. Asahi and Yi rush into the room after being awakened by the noise, and we can already imagine the scene. Uriu is on top of the redhead again. But instead of reacting the same way, the other 2 girls just close the door and apologize for interrupting. Uriu tries to convince them it was an accident, but once once again he's ignored. After yet another incident, the four of them gather again and Uriu asks what Yuna was doing up so late. Yi explains that her sister was hand-making charms and the redhead warns him not to touch the papers or they'll lose their sacred power. Uriu then asks why she puts so much effort into making these charms for visitors when she doesn't even make money from it, to which she replies that it's natural for them to do so. Asahi further explains that the three sisters connect the deities with the people who pray to them because that's a priestess's duty, to grant protection so that miracles can happen. Uriu then asks why all three of them wear red cords and Yi reveals that these cords were left to them by their mother. Even though they can no longer see her since she's passed on, Yuna believes these cords unite their feelings with their mother's. According to Asahi, it's like a treasure to them. Changing the subject, the redhead asks why the young man is still awake at this hour, to which he responds that he's been studying to get into Kyoto's medical school. Yuna is surprised, having thought he was just a rude pervert, while the older one assures him that the deities of the shrine grant success in passing exams. Besides, this is the time of wish fulfillment known as the Rain of Wishing Stars. According to an ancient legend, on spring nights, when the stars fall, if you bathe in the stardust rain, your wish will come true as long as you pray to the deities every day. Upon hearing this, Uriu laughs and says it's ridiculous because the meteor showers this time of year are small in scale and disintegrate in the atmosphere before reaching Earth. Even if one did land, it would just crush anyone with the impact. That's why Uriu thinks for someone to believe in such nonsense, their brain must be melted. Hearing this, Yuna loses her temper and threatens to curse the newcomer, and Yi has to hold her back. The next day, Uriu continues his argument that amulets and prayers don't work, and since a priest's job is to connect people with the deities, he could never imagine himself in that role. Seeing Yuna struggling to communicate with a child in English at the shrine, he steps in and tells the child in her own language to take the talisman and take good care of it. After the little girl leaves, Uriu remarks to Yuna that she should study more English to better welcome foreign visitors, and he offers to help her with that. Yuna is initially annoyed, but later admits he helped her and agrees to work on her English. Right after, a strong wind blows toward them and a bird flies past Yuna carrying away the hair tie left to her by her mother. She asked her sisters to help look for the tie, but the afternoon was ending and they hadn't found anything. The sisters assured her that the deities would help, but Uriu, tired of the talk, said that someone's wishes won't come true just because they pray. Yuna retorted with equal intensity, saying the deities would never abandon anyone asking for help. After the girls calmed the argument, Yuna told him he didn't belong here and walked away. Back in his room, Uriu figured it was best to stay away from the redhead. Shortly after, Asahi and Yi knocked and entered, but he wasn't there. The older one found a picture of him with his mother. From what their grandfather had told them, Uriu lost his mother when he was very young and grew up in an orphanage. Putting the pieces together, they assumed he must have prayed to the deities every day, but his wish never came true, which is why he's an atheist, believing that only people's efforts can change their reality. Asahi joked that Uriu was similar to Yuna because both hide their true feelings, and the middle sister overheard this part. Meanwhile, Uriu was doing everything he could to find the tie the bird had taken, seeking redemption after their argument, but had no luck. Dirty and exhausted, he remembered the girls praying and asking the deities for guidance. Similarly, Yuna was searching for her beloved tie until she saw the young man praying at the shrine for her to find her treasure. Happy, she approached and commented that speaking the wish out loud helps the deities hear it. They both apologized to each other, and Yuna said that since he showed respect to the deities, he had met the requirements to live at the shrine. Yi and Asahi arrived shortly after having searched for both of them, and while the older one was relieved they'd returned alive, the younger one teased that it was just a couple on a late-night date. This time, Uriu cracked a brief smile and joined the women in heading back. He remembered the tie was still missing, but Yi said they could look for it more carefully later, and since Yuna and he had made their wishes to the deities, a miracle might happen. Upon hearing this, Uriu noticed the sky had completely changed and the flying cherry blossom petals had taken on a brilliant glow. In that moment, he was certain it was the rain of wishing stars, though he still didn't think there was anything miraculous about it, chalking it up to cherry blossoms and meteors falling simultaneously and creating the effect. Yuna commented that he was really boring, and Asahi added decided that he must be a blast on dates. In any case, they urged him to take a closer look and decide for himself if it seemed like a miracle, and he admitted that it did a little. With that, they made their way home, and the missing tie was lifted from the bird's nest and fell right back onto Yuna's head. The next day, Chidori Amagami, the high priest, finally arrived at the shrine and apologized for the delay. Taking advantage of Uriu's presence for marriage, Chidori no longer needed to worry about who would inherit the shrine after his passing. Uriu was shocked by this declaration, having had no idea this was in the plans, but the old man continued to explain that Uriu would need to marry one of his 3 granddaughters. The young man argues that he didn't know about any of this, and that he only came to study innocently, and the girls take the same stance, claiming they weren't informed either. To start off, Uriu reminds everyone that he's going to be a doctor and won't be inheriting any shrine, to which the old man replies that it's no problem to carry on the duties of a superior priest as a secondary job. Regardless of what the elder says, Uriu is far from pleased with this news until Chidori mentions that she was thinking of sending him to a high school with a strong acceptance rate for Kyoto University, but since the deal for him to live there fell through, that's fine. Upon hearing that, Uriu changes his attitude, completely kneels and confesses that he's just an incompetent young man, but gladly accepts joining the priest's family. While Chidori celebrates the shrine's future being secured, all Uriu can think about is enduring this situation until he gets into college, assuming the old man will probably forget about the whole marriage thing along the way. As for the third side of the story, naturally Yuna makes it clear to her sisters that she would hate to marry that boy, and that their grandfather must have something wrong in his head to suggest such a thing. Yi sees the boy differently, thinking Uriu is a good guy, but she can't marry him without having dated first. Finally, Asahi thinks this is all happening way too fast. First things first, Yuna questions how a guy who doesn't even believe in deities could inherit a shrine, and considering all this drama, she concludes there's only one solution: to make that boy's life so difficult that he leaves for good. Operation number 1 is to make absurd demands for him to cook. When Uriu opens the fridge to cook something and finds it practically empty, Yuna laughs maliciously because no human being could make something with that pathetic amount of food. Nevertheless, some time later, the boy had managed to prepare an excellent meal. With the little he had, then takes off his cooking apron to study, thinking that nonsense is finally over. However, as always, Yuna announces that there's more for him to do before he can go. In Operation 2, the goal is to make the poor guy's life miserable by having him wash a mountain of clothes, especially since there's no dryer in the house, making this task exhausting. However, the sisters don't think it's a great idea because the boy will be washing their underwear. When he starts pulling bras and panties out of the basket, Yi and Asahi don't know where to look, and Yuna realizes she made a mistake. In the middle of the task, Uriu loses his patience and demands to know where the panties that go with this bra are, to which Yuna awkwardly responds that they don't always wear matching sets. After all the laundry, the clothes were impeccably clean and folded. The eldest sister admits the young man can do anything. The youngest notes that he's a pro, but the middle sister remains combative and refuses to give in to this outsider. Bearing in mind that her 2 operations have failed miserably, she announces that she'll have to use her final weapon. Uriu is going to clean Yi's room. He's led to what looks more like a war zone than a bedroom. This is Operation 3, and this time the evil sister has no doubt Uriu will fail. So the poor guy is left alone in that dump, where one part reeks so grotesquely that he suspects something might be rotting there. However, it turns out it's just oil paints causing the smell. Yuna notes that her sister is going to art school, which surprises Uriu since he hadn't imagined that. Some time later, Yi's room was spotless. The owner of the room, finally seeing the tatami mat she hadn't seen in ages, is so pleased she tells her sisters Uriu should just live there. Asahi agrees, saying it would be great to have such a useful guy around the house, but Uriu Kamihate makes an unexpected move by acknowledging that although it was a short time, he's saying goodbye to the girls because he can't endure such a grueling routine while having so little time to study. His mission is to get into Kyoto University, and that requires intense dedication, which he hasn't been able to maintain here. With that, Uriu really packs his bag and leaves without looking back, leaving the girls behind. Asahi thanks all the viewers, saying the series is over, but Yuna reminds her that this was the plan all along, so there's no use crying over spilled milk now. Later on the subway, Uriu continues studying English when we see that the three Amagami sisters have decided to follow him, with Yuna being the one who made the call, claiming they can't lose such an efficient worker. The three notice that the guy is always studying whenever he has a moment, and they wonder if he wants to become a doctor because of his mother. As time passes with Uriu leaving the subway, the trio from Japan is right behind, following the students every step. On an early afternoon, when the sky threatened to rain at any moment, Uriu headed toward a more secluded area with a dirt road and trees surrounding him. Up ahead, crows crowded the roof of the house where the boy entered, and the sisters began to feel like they had stumbled into a horror movie without realizing it. Yuna feels guilty for kicking the poor guy and forcing him to come live there, but before she can dwell on it, Uriu himself appears behind her and apologizes for the mansion being in such a rundown state. Yuna immediately throws coarse salt at him, panicking even more when she sees a bunch of weird things stuck to him. Her sisters quickly calm her down, explaining that it's none other than Uriu and some kids. The boys then make a few comments about the noticeable size differences between the girls' chests, while Uriu, a bit confused, asks what the girls are doing there. At that moment, a woman dressed like a doctor named Maharu Ainkoji appears, joking about how Uriu must look like quite the ladies' man surrounded by all these women. Uriu, flustered, quickly tells her to knock it off, at least for now. They are in fact at the Kaisuke foster home, and Maharu is in charge of the place. She genuinely thanks the girls from the bottom of her heart for accepting Uriu and asks them to take good care of him, though the girls smile awkwardly, knowing that the reality was quite different. Maharu even goes on to say she had wondered if the girls were too pretty to end up with Uriu, especially since all he does is study, which can be a bit boring. But once in a while he manages to be sweet. Ever since he was a kid, he would mimic whatever the doctor did, even dreaming of attending the University of Tokyo. At this point, Uriu loses his patience, no longer wanting to hear Maharu talk about his life. He makes it clear he would never marry those girls, contrary to what Maharu seems to be implying. He's about to say he'll never set foot in that shrine again, but Maharu covers his mouth, reminding him that he will have to leave the foster home one day and that she worked hard to find a place for him, so he'd better behave. Asahi comments on how beautiful Maharu is, while Yi admires how well she treats Uriu. Two kids show Uriu some paper birds they've folded, and a girl named Shirahi Tsurayama explains that they're folding 1,000 of them. Uriu mentions that she's a childhood friend of his who used to live there. Yi says it's nice to meet her, while Asahi quietly remarks that Shirahi looks a bit like a man, to which Una scolds her younger sister for being rude. Shirahi laughs it off, saying the girls are funny. A child then shows the sisters another paper bird, saying they're going to give it to their mom. Since they're at a foster home, the girls are a bit confused, so Maharu explains that the home is for children whose parents are too ill or injured to take care of them. Shirahi adds that's why they're folding 1,000 paper cranes, so the children can give them to their families. The Amagami sisters find this a heartwarming gesture, though Uriu thinks folding so many good luck charms that don't actually work is a waste of time. This time, Yuna slams her hand on the table, refusing to let his comment slide. She explains that out of all the good luck charms, the 1,000 paper cranes are special. She tells the kids to ignore the silly guy and keep folding. Maharu mentions to Uriu that the girls are actually really nice, but Uriu strongly disagrees. Eventually, the sisters decide to help the kids fold the cranes, though Asahi struggles with the task. On the other hand, Yi creates a masterpiece while Yuna is only halfway through. The children then pull Uriu aside, saying that at this pace, they'll never finish in time. Giving in to the pressure, Uriu decides to help. In no time at all, Uriu had folded a mountain of cranes with incredible efficiency, and the children were overjoyed. One of them asked, though, if the good luck charms would really work. Hearing this, Uriu was transported to a memory of when he had made this same charm for his own mother. With that memory in mind, he picked up the folded cranes and assured the little boy that the charm would work, because when the doctor sees it, they'll realize they need to work extra hard to take care of everyone's mom and dad. Maharu chimes in, mentioning that Uriu had made thousands of cranes for his own mother, so he understands how the children feel better than anyone. Hearing this, Yi deduces that this is why Uriu wants to become a doctor, and Shirahi adds that he's always been kind like this, even though he can be a bit rough around the edges. With that said, Maharu asks the Amagami Amagami sisters to take good care of him. As the day goes on, the sisters spend the whole afternoon at the foster home. When Maharu asks, Uriu explains that he left the shrine because the girls gave him 1,000 chores to do, leaving him no time to study. However, Maharu doesn't believe that was the only reason, knowing that Uriu's never been great at socializing. Still, she's sure that Uriu is welcome at the shrine because the 3 priestesses only came looking for him out of concern. After all, he's never been the type to give up over a few household chores. Hearing this, Uriu recalls a childhood memory where one day he offered to help Maharu with the countless tasks she was doing all at once, but the doctor replied that she was ambitious and liked doing everything herself. Remembering this, Uriu promises to give it his all. The Amagami sisters, overhearing the conversation, start teasing Uriu about how much he's in love with the doctor. He quickly clarifies that he only admires her for everything she's done for him. He then apologizes for being selfish and leaving the shrine the way he did, saying he's willing to do whatever chores are needed. Yuna replies that if they left everything to him, she and her sisters would just become lazy, so it'd be better if everyone worked together since they're all a family now. With that, Uriu feels happy about returning to the shrine, but quickly realizes that these girls are completely useless when it comes to household chores. Whether it's doing laundry or cooking, the 3 of them are hopeless, meaning all the work is bound to fall on him. Chidori then arrives, pleased to see Uriu stepping into the role of head of the household, and announces that he'll soon be partaking in an arranged marriage meeting with each of his granddaughters. According to him, an arranged marriage meeting is an ancient and important ritual in Japanese tradition and should be taken very seriously. In this regard, Uriu feels quite uncomfortable about doing such a thing, and he assumes the 3 girls feel the same way. Regardless, it's time for the first meeting, so the heir is brought to meet the 3rd daughter, Asahi, who thanks him for agreeing to see her. At that point, Amagami leaves the boy alone with the girl, and Uriu asks if she isn't bothered by this meeting. Asahi responds that there's nothing she can do about it, so since she's obligated to be there, she might as well try to make it as fun as possible. Unless, of course, Uriu wants to have a real date. He thinks she's making a bad joke, but she seems to take it much more seriously, to the point that she starts taking off a piece of clothing in front of him, forcing him to cover his eyes so he doesn't see more than he should. According to Asahi, there's always been something she's wanted to do with Uriu. In this case, she's always wanted to race alongside the heir. With that, the 2 run together through the city, and Uriu is left wondering what kind of date this is, as it feels more like a CrossFit session. He asks if Asahi is a fan of running, and not only does she love it, but she also sees this kind of exercise as the very air she breathes. This surprises Uriu because among the 3 sisters, he was sure the youngest was the most carefree. His comment offends Asahi, who threatens to leave him in the dust during their run. In response, Uriu assures her that he won't lose to a middle school girl in a race. 3 hours later, the guy is completely exhausted, practically on the verge of collapsing from the effort. Struggling to stay on his feet, he staggers toward the bathroom to take a shower, only to find Asahi already occupying the bathtub. He slams the door shut and asks what kind of pervert does that, and she nonchalantly explains that she enjoys bathing with the door open. After the grueling date, which was practically a marathon, Uriu ends up passing out and wakes up at 5 am. Asahi, who had been lying beside him without him noticing, asks if he at least slept well, causing Uriu to jump in fright and scream. It turns out Asahi wants to continue the date where they left off, suggesting they search for her running shoes in the storage shed before their morning run. Uriu responds that she doesn't want a date at all. She just wants to make him work for her. Whether that's her intention or not, the 2 head to the shed to look for the missing shoes. Asahi insists that Uriu should make it clear to Mr. Amagami that everything went well in this arranged meeting. Uriu is already mentally checked out of the conversation, especially now that the shed is a complete mess and they'll have to rummage through it in the dark to find the shoes. Speaking of which, Asahi gets excited, saying this is a classic heart racing situation since Uriu is alone with a pretty girl in a cramped shed and anything could happen if they end up trapped together in there. Uriu quickly points out that this kind of thing only happens in manga, so it's best they focus on finding what they came for. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blows through the shed, slamming the windows and doors shut. The door ends up being locked from the outside by a wooden latch that fell due to the wind. Uriu tries to find a way out, while Asahi remarks that the shed is old and the door tends to lock when closed too hard. Once again, Uriu notes that this kind of thing should only happen in manga, and while pondering how to escape, he considers yelling for help, though he doubts it'll be effective. Asahi wonders why he's so scared considering he's locked up with a beautiful girl. However, as she says this, Asahi herself appears terrified and starts trembling. Remembering that she chose to bathe with the door open, Uriu asks if she's afraid of enclosed spaces, but she quickly denies it, insisting she's fine because she's an adult. Uriu knows she's just putting on a brave face, so he moves closer, places a hand on her head, and assures her that everything will be fine. If she's scared, she can hold on to him. As the heir of the shrine tries to find a way to break open the window, Asahi clings to him from behind, feeling safe in his presence. At dawn, Uriu finally manages to open the window and tells the youngest Amagami sister to wait while he jumps out and opens the door from the outside. Touched, Asahi notices the scratches on his hands from his efforts, but there's a small detail that suggests all his work was in vain. The window Uriu opened is on the second floor. Determined not to give up, the clever guy decides to jump and be done with it once and for all. He follows through, opens the door for Asahi, and only asks that she forget everything that happened. Exhausted, he turns to leave, but Asahi chases after him to thank him and apologize for everything. Uriu responds that she should apologize because the date was terrible. After all, he had to run a marathon for nothing and ended up locked in a shed. Despite everything, Uriu pats Asahi on the head and reassures her that she's still a cute girl. Embarrassed by his unexpected kindness, Asahi hugs her shoebox and denies that any of it is true. At that moment, her sisters rush over to check on the youngest, but Asahi insists they're overreacting because thanks to Uriu, she'll never forget this night. Of course, she says it in a teasing tone, making her sisters misunderstand, and the poor guy gets beaten up for something he didn't even do. The next day, he prepares to meet the second daughter, already bracing himself for the hell that's surely about to come. However, to his surprise, Yuna is acting completely different than usual, asking the young man to consider her a worthy candidate for marriage. As Uriu begins walking alongside the middle sister in the courtyard, he can't shake the feeling that something's off. This has to be a setup of some kind, because this girl is anything but sweet and her current behavior doesn't add up. To break the silence, Yuna asks what he's interested in, and he replies that he enjoys studying. Responding with an unusually enthusiastic tone, Yuna exclaims how wonderful it is that he's such a studious young man. Uriu, however, is left more confused than ever, unsure why she's acting this way. At that moment, a black cat crosses their path, and Yuna shoos it away with a wave of her hand. Uriu starts to think she might not be fond of cats. Everything feels way too strange, so he decides to ask why she's behaving like this. In response, Yuna drops the pretense, shoves him to the ground, and with a crazed expression shouts that even though it might be too soon, she would love for Uriu to father an heir for this sanctuary with her. Shocked, Uriu snaps at her, telling her to control herself and not blurt out such things without thinking. But Yuna fires back, saying that it's the only useful thing she can do for the sanctuary. Realizing she's gone overboard, she apologizes and excuses herself to fix her makeup. Outside, her sisters were whispering to each other about how bizarre the situation had become, while Uriu kindly asked them to stop snooping on the whole affair. Asahi remarks that Yuna is clearly panicking, and Yi adds that while all three of them want the sanctuary to thrive, sometimes things spiral out of control. Uriu is certain that Yuna doesn't even like him, and he's starting to think about marrying one of the other sisters to avoid dealing with her. Asahi explains that Yuna is only sacrificing herself to save the three of them from poverty and nothing more. Even so, both Asahi and Yi are worried about Yuna's behavior, so Uriu asks what she truly likes. Not long after, Uriu meets up with Yuna again and invites her to go out. This time, he takes her to a cat cafe where they can interact with the animals freely. Yuna quickly warms up to the cute creatures and starts to relax, giving Uriu the perfect chance to bring up the subject of the sanctuary. Her sisters are concerned, he tells her. Yuna, however, firmly believes this is her duty, just as Uriu is determined to become a doctor for the children at the orphanage. Uriu acknowledges that she sees it as a responsibility, but advises her to take it easy from time to time. Her sisters are important too, and they've been really worried about her. Leading by example, Uriu decides to set his studies aside for the day to play with the cats, prompting Yuna to follow suit and enjoy herself without a care. By late afternoon, as they leave the cafe, Yuna gives Uriu a small token of appreciation and admits that she had a lot of fun. But as soon as Uriu sees her in this laid-back mood, his paranoid mind kicks in again, convinced she's pulling some trick on him and isn't being sincere. Annoyed by his skepticism, Yuna gets angry and throws salt at him once more. The next day, it's time for Uriu to meet the third and final Amagami, Sister Yi the eldest. But the problem is she doesn't show up. Uriu, frustrated, goes to her room to confront her. Inside, Yi is still getting dressed, which leads to an embarrassing moment for Uriu, who regrets barging in without knocking. At least he figures he can study while he waits for her to get ready. An hour passes and Yi is still nowhere to be seen. Growing desperate, Uriu bangs on her door again, but nothing happens. Taking matters into his own hands, he blindfolds himself and steps into her room, only to find that Yi isn't there. He rushes downstairs to see if her sisters know where she is, but no one has a clue. Asahi points out that Yi left her phone behind, and Yuna starts to believe that their sister has been taken by spirits. After searching high and low, Uriu finally finds Yi calmly sketching, as if nothing is wrong. She asks how he knew she'd be there, and he explains that he saw an unfinished painting of the Torii gates in her room, and figured she might be at the Amagami Shrine for inspiration. Putting that aside, Uriu demands to know why she skipped their meeting, to which Yi replies that it's a feminine secret. But since he found her, they might as well do what they're supposed to. The two end up strolling through the shrine and later the streets. By the end of the day, Yi gives Uriu an amulet against evil as an apology, and not missing a beat asks which of the sisters he's going to marry. Reviewing the contenders, Yi comments that Asahi tries to appear more mature than she really is, but with her endearing cuteness, Uriu might grow fond of her in time. Yuna, though a bit short-tempered, always shows her good side. And finally, there's the possibility that Uriu could fall for Yi herself. Embarrassed by this talk, Uriu loses his balance and tumbles down the shrine stairs. Yi tries to catch him, but ends up breaking the amulet against evil. In the chaos, Uriu has a near-death experience, seeing his life flash before his eyes. He wonders if he's about to join his mother in the afterlife. But then he glimpses future visions of himself as a doctor holding an identification card bearing the name Uriu Amagami. In this vision, he's married to all three sisters. He then wakes up and realizes it was all just a dream.